This video is made for entertainment purposes only. They told me I was crazy. That I'd thrown away a 23-year career for nothing. That what I saw out there on the Cascade Trestle wasn't real, couldn't have been real. But I know what I saw. And more than that, I know what I felt in those few seconds when our eyes met across 100 feet of moonlit timber and steel. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was a freight conductor for Northern Pacific Rail for over 2 decades. I've hauled everything from grain to timber, from automobiles to livestock. I've seen black bears cross the tracks in Montana, watched elk herds scatter in Wyoming, even had a moose charge the locomotive in Idaho. In all those years, in all those miles of wilderness track, I thought I'd seen everything the American wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong. This happened in late September of 2019. I remember the date exactly, September 27th, because it was the night that changed everything. Not just for me, but for reasons I wouldn't understand until much later, for a lot of other people too. I was running the overnight freight from Seattle to Spokane, a route I'd done hundreds of times. It was a standard manifest train, mixed cargo, nothing special, or so I thought. We'd left the King Street Station rail yard around 11:30 p.m., right on schedule. The manifest listed the usual stuff: containerized goods, some automotive parts, agricultural equipment heading to the eastern part of the state. But there was one addition that night. 6 flat cars near the rear of the consist, covered with heavy tarps and marked with Department of Defense placards. Military cargo. It wasn't uncommon. We ran defense contract freight several times a month, but something about this shipment felt different. The security was tighter. There were 2 DoD transportation officers in the second locomotive, which was unusual. Normally, military cargo just gets sealed, documented, and hauled like anything else. My engineer that night was Tommy Chin, a good kid. Well, I say kid, but he was 38, who'd been running engines for about 12 years. Solid, reliable, never rattled. We'd worked together dozens of times, had that comfortable rhythm where you don't need to talk much because you both know the job inside and out. The weather was clear, temperature in the low 50s, and we were making good time through the Cascades. The tracks through this section wind through some of the most remote wilderness in Washington state. Dense old-growth forest, steep ravines, and gorges carved by ancient glaciers. It's beautiful country during the day, but at night, it becomes something else entirely. The darkness out there isn't like city darkness. It's absolute, primal. The kind of darkness that makes you remember that humans are very recent additions to this landscape. We were about 90 miles east of Seattle, approaching the Skykomish River crossing, when Tommy radioed back to me in the conductor's compartment. Marcus, we're coming up on Cascade Trestle. Mile marker 127. Should be crossing in about 4 minutes. Copy that, I replied. Speed. Holding at 42. Tracks clear, signals are green. The Cascade Trestle. Even the name sounds ominous, doesn't it? It's a steel railroad bridge built in 1927, spanning a deep gorge carved by the Skykomish River. The bridge itself is about 800 feet long and sits 200 feet above the water. It's a beautiful piece of engineering, but also slightly unsettling. The structure is narrow, just wide enough for a single track, with open lattice sides that let you see straight down to the river below. In daylight, it's impressive. At night, it feels like you're driving a train across a tightrope stretched over an abyss. I'd crossed that bridge hundreds of times without incident. There was no reason to think this night would be any different. I was reviewing the cargo manifest on my tablet when Tommy's voice came over the radio again. This time, there was something in his tone that made me look up immediately. Marcus, we've got something on the bridge. I keyed the radio. Define something. Debris. Rock slide. There was a pause. A long one. Too long. Tommy, report. What are you seeing? I don't know how to describe it. It's big. Really big. And it's moving. I was already on my feet, moving toward the front of the train. Animal? Bear? No. Not a bear. It's standing. Marcus, it's standing on 2 legs. My first thought was that someone was on the bridge. A hiker, maybe, or someone who'd gotten lost and wandered onto the tracks. It happened occasionally, usually ending badly if we couldn't stop in time. "How far out are we?" I asked, already calculating stopping distance in my head. A freight train at 40 miles per hour needs roughly a quarter mile to come to a complete stop. The physics are unforgiving. Maybe 1,500 feet and closing. "Marcus, this thing is huge. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It's just standing there, in the middle of the bridge. Hit the horn. Maybe it'll move." I heard the locomotive's horn blast through the night, that deep echoing sound that can carry for miles. It's a sound that makes everything with a survival instinct get out of the way. Everything except whatever was on that bridge. "It's not moving," Tommy reported, and now I could hear the tension in his voice. "Marcus, we need to make a decision. Now." I reached the front locomotive and climbed up beside Tommy. Through the windshield, illuminated in the powerful beam of our headlight, I could see the bridge ahead. And there, right in the center of the trestle, I saw it. Even now, 5 years later, I struggle to find the right words to describe what I saw in those few seconds. Your brain tries to categorize things, to fit them into familiar boxes. Bear, moose, human. But this fit none of those categories. It was massive. Tommy's estimate of 7 to 8 feet was probably conservative. Broad-shouldered, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. But it wasn't the size that stopped me cold. It was the way it stood. There was nothing animalistic about its posture. It wasn't hunched or aggressive or confused. It stood upright, balanced on 2 powerful legs, with its arms, yes, arms, not front legs, hanging at its sides. And even from that distance, even in that strange interplay of headlight and shadow, I could see intelligence in the way it held itself. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "What do we do?" Tommy asked. His hand was on the throttle, his eyes locked on the figure ahead. "Marcus, what do we do?" I had maybe 5 seconds to make a decision. The physics were brutal and unforgiving. We were hauling 73 loaded cars plus 2 locomotives, roughly 8,000 tons of steel and cargo moving at 42 miles per hour. Even with emergency braking, we'd need at least 1,200 feet to stop. We were less than 1,000 feet from the bridge. If we hit him, some part of my brain was already correcting. At this speed and weight, there wouldn't be enough left to identify. But there was something else. Something I couldn't articulate in that moment, but felt with absolute certainty. This creature was on that bridge for a reason. It wasn't confused or lost or suicidal. It was there deliberately, blocking our path, and the way it stood, calm, resolute, waiting, suggested it knew exactly what it was doing. "Emergency brakes," I said. "Now." Tommy didn't hesitate. He slammed the emergency brake handle, and immediately the world became a screaming symphony of metal on metal. The dynamic brakes engaged first, using the traction motors as generators to slow us down. A split second later, the air brakes hit, all 73 cars simultaneously, and the entire train shuddered violently. I grabbed the overhead rail to keep from being thrown forward. The brake force was immense, the deceleration pressing against my chest like a physical weight. Behind us, I could hear the cars bunching slightly, the couplers absorbing the compression. The wheels were screaming against the rails, and I could smell the acrid scent of hot metal and brake shoes. Through the windshield, the creature remained perfectly still. It didn't flinch, didn't move. Just stood there, watching us as thousands of tons of steel tried desperately to stop. The distance closed with terrifying speed. 800 feet. 600. 400. "We're not going to make it," Tommy said, his voice tight. But the brakes were doing their job. Our speed was dropping fast. 35, 30, 25. The bridge was maybe 200 feet ahead now, and we were still moving, but slower. 20 miles per hour. 150 feet. 15 miles per hour. 100 feet. And then, when we were maybe 75 feet from the bridge entrance, moving at about 10 miles per hour, the creature did something that still haunts me. It looked directly at me. Not at the train. Not at the headlight or the locomotive or the tons of steel bearing down on it. At me. Through the windshield, Across that shrinking distance, it locked eyes with me. And I swear to God, it nodded. A single, deliberate movement of its head. A gesture of acknowledgement. Of gratitude. Then, with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something that large, it turned and leaped off the side of the bridge. I lunged to the window, pressing my face against the glass to see. The creature fell through the darkness, dropping toward the river 200 feet below. For a moment, I thought I just watched it commit suicide, that our presence had somehow forced it to choose death over being hit by the train. But just before it disappeared from view, I saw it twist in midair, adjusting its body position like a cliff diver. A second later, I heard the distant splash as it hit the water. Our train came to a complete stop about 50 feet from the bridge entrance, the nose of the locomotive just short of the trestle's steel framework. Tommy and I sat in stunned silence for several long seconds, the only sound the hissing of air brakes and the ticking of cooling metal. "Did that just happen?" Tommy finally asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, the radio crackled to life. It was one of the DoD transportation officers from the second locomotive. "Conductor Webb, this is Lieutenant Morrison. What the hell is going on? Why did we emergency stop?" I picked up the radio, my hand still shaking slightly. "We had an obstruction on the bridge. Large animal. It's clear now." "What kind of animal?" I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? That I'd just seen Bigfoot? That I'd stopped 8,000 tons of freight train to avoid hitting a cryptid that supposedly doesn't exist? "Bear," I lied. "Large bear. It's gone now. We're clear to proceed." There was a pause on the other end. "Conductor, bears don't cause emergency stops. You're trained to handle wildlife encounters with warning protocols, not full emergency braking. I'm going to need a full incident report on this." "Understood," I replied. "We'll file it when we reach Spokane." I released the radio and looked at Tommy. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That wasn't a bear," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. So what was it?" I looked back at the bridge, now empty and normal-looking in our headlight. Beyond it, the darkness of the forest pressed in from all sides. "I don't know," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. I knew what I'd seen. I just didn't know if I could trust my own eyes. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are we going to tell them? The truth, I mean." I thought about it. Thought about how it would sound. Thought about the questions, the skepticism, the inevitable ridicule. Thought about the media circus that would follow if word got out that a train crew claimed to have seen Bigfoot. "We stopped for an obstruction on the tracks," I said carefully. "That obstruction has been cleared. We proceed to Spokane and file a standard incident report." "Agreed." Tommy nodded slowly. "Agreed." But even as I said it, I knew something didn't add up. The way that creature had stood there, deliberately blocking our path. The timing of it, this specific train, this specific night. And those military cars in the back. I pushed the thought away. We had a schedule to keep. "Release the brakes," I said. "Let's get moving." Tommy released the brakes, and slowly, with the groaning protest of heavy machinery returning to motion, we started moving again. The locomotive crept forward, and within moments, we were on the bridge. I moved to the side window and looked down. 200 feet below, the Skycomish River was barely visible, just a dark ribbon reflecting occasional moonlight. There was no sign of the creature. No disturbance in the water. Nothing to indicate that anything unusual had just happened. We crossed the trestle without incident and continued into the night. For the next 3 hours, neither Tommy nor I said much. We went through the motions of our jobs, monitoring speed, checking signals, coordinating with dispatch, but the silence between us was heavy with unspoken questions. It was around 3:30 a.m., as we were approaching the eastern foothills of the Cascades, that Tommy finally broke the silence. "Marcus, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "That thing back there. It was waiting for us, wasn't it? Specifically for us." I'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't wanted to voice it. What makes you say that? The way it stood there. It wasn't scared. It wasn't confused. It was determined, like it had a purpose. And then when we stopped, it just left. Like its job was done. Its job being what? Stopping the train. Not stopping it, Tommy said slowly. Delaying it. A chill ran down my spine. Why would it want to delay us? Tommy glanced back toward the cargo cars behind us. What if it wasn't about us at all? What if it was about what we're carrying? I followed his gaze, thinking about those 6 flat cars with their heavy tarps and DoD placards. Military cargo gets hauled all the time. There's nothing special about. Then why the extra security? Tommy interrupted. 2 transport officers riding with us? That's unusual, Marcus. You know it is. He was right. In all my years running freight, I'd only had DoD officers aboard maybe 4 or 5 times, and those had been for truly sensitive shipments, experimental technology, classified equipment, that sort of thing. What are you suggesting? I asked, though part of me already knew. I'm suggesting that maybe that creature knew something we don't. Maybe it knew what we're hauling back there, and maybe it had a damn good reason for wanting to slow us down. Before I could respond, the radio crackled again. Lieutenant Morrison's voice came through, sounding tense. Conductor Webb, I need you and your engineer to maintain current speed and proceed directly to Spokane without any further stops. No slowdowns, no delays. Is that clear? I picked up the radio. Lieutenant, we make scheduled stops according to. Your scheduled stops have been canceled, Morrison cut in. You. Proceed directly to Spokane Rail Yard. Those are orders from DoD Transportation Command. Acknowledge. I exchanged a glance with Tommy. Acknowledged, I said into the radio. Proceeding direct to Spokane. The radio went silent. That's not normal, Tommy said quietly. No, I agreed. It's not. The rest of the journey passed without incident, but the tension in the locomotive cab was palpable. Tommy kept the throttle steady, and I monitored our systems, but both of us were acutely aware of those 6 military cars behind us. We rolled into Spokane Rail Yard just after 6 a.m., as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. Normally, we'd help with the sorting and distribution of cargo, but Lieutenant Morrison and his partner, a stone-faced woman named Captain Reeves, were waiting on the platform as we pulled in. Gentlemen, Morrison said as we climbed down from the locomotive, I'm going to need both of you to come with me for debriefing. Debriefing? I asked. For an animal on the tracks? Morrison's expression was unreadable. For an unauthorized emergency stop that delayed a classified military shipment by 47 minutes. Yes, Conductor Webb. Debriefing. They took us to a small office in the administrative building, a windowless room with a metal table and 4 chairs. Morrison and Reeves sat across from us, and for the next hour, they questioned us about every detail of the stop. What exactly did we see? How large was it? What color? How did it move? What direction did it go? Why did we decide to emergency brake instead of following standard wildlife encounter protocols? Tommy and I stuck to our story. Large animal, possibly a bear, blocking the tracks. We couldn't be certain of the species in the dark. We made a split-second decision to avoid a collision. Standard safety procedure. Morrison didn't look convinced, but he didn't push too hard. What bothered me more was Captain Reeves. She barely spoke, but her eyes never left us. She was evaluating us, measuring us, trying to determine if we were lying. Finally, Morrison closed his notebook. All right. You're both suspended pending investigation. Full pay, but you don't run any trains until we complete our inquiry. Someone from Northern Pacific Corporate will be in touch. That's all. Suspended, I said, standing up. For stopping the train to avoid hitting something? For delaying a classified military shipment, Morrison corrected. If your story checks out, you'll be back to work in a week or 2. If it doesn't, he let the threat hang in the air. Tommy and I were escorted out of the rail yard. We stood in the parking lot, the morning sun now fully risen, both of us exhausted and confused. "This is insane," Tommy said. "We did our jobs. We stopped the train to avoid an accident." "Yeah," I said quietly. "But what if that's exactly what someone didn't want us to do?" Tommy looked at me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that creature didn't just randomly decide to stand on that bridge. I'm thinking it knew what we were carrying. And I'm thinking that maybe, just maybe, stopping that train was exactly the right thing to do." "So what do we do now?" I pulled out my phone. "Now, we figure out what the hell we were hauling." Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I couldn't let it go. The image of that creature standing on the bridge, the deliberate way it had blocked our path, the military's overreaction to a simple emergency stop. I started digging. I had contacts throughout the rail industry. Dispatchers, cargo coordinators, maintenance crews, people who'd worked with me over 2 decades and trusted me. I called in every favor I had. What I found disturbed me. The cargo on those 6 flat cars wasn't listed on any standard manifest. The only documentation was a DoD routing order with a classification level I'd never seen before. But one of my contacts in Seattle, a cargo inspector named Helen who'd been with the railroad for 30 years, managed to get me some information. "Marcus, you need to be careful with this," she told me over the phone. "I'm not even supposed to know what I'm about to tell you. Helen, please. I need to understand what happened out there." She sighed. "All right. But this conversation never happened. Understand?" "Understood." "Those flat cars were loaded at Joint Base Lewis McChord 2 days before your run. The cargo was seismic survey equipment, specialized sensors and monitoring devices. But here's the thing, they weren't being shipped to another military base. They were being transported to a private contractor in Spokane who specializes in resource extraction surveys." "Resource extraction? You mean mining?" "Mining, drilling, geological surveys. Yeah. The company is called Cascade Resources Group. They do mineral surveys for both private industry and government contracts." My mind was racing. Why would the military be so protective of survey equipment? "That's what bothered me too," Helen said. "So I did some more digging. Marcus, that equipment wasn't for finding minerals. It was for mapping underground structures, caves, aquifers, natural caverns. Specifically, they were heading to survey a remote area in the North Cascades. An area that's been off-limits to the public for decades." "Off-limits? You mean protected wilderness?" "No. I mean restricted. As in, you go there, you get arrested for trespassing on federal land. There's no signage, no public records of why it's restricted. It's just forbidden territory." I felt a cold weight settling in my stomach. "Where exactly?" "About 40 miles northwest of where you made your emergency stop. Deep wilderness, accessible only by helicopter or a few old logging roads that have been gated and guarded for years." After I hung up with Helen, I sat in my apartment for a long time, staring at a map of the Cascades spread across my kitchen table. I marked the location of the Cascade Trestle with a red X, then circled the area Helen had described. The creature hadn't been randomly standing on that bridge. It had been blocking our path, delaying our cargo. Survey equipment meant to map underground structures in a restricted area of the Cascades, an area that was apparently home to something the government didn't want anyone to know about. My phone rang. It was Tommy. "Marcus, we need to talk." "Not over the phone. Can you meet me?" 30 minutes later, we were sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Spokane, both of us nursing large cups of black coffee and speaking in low voices. "I've been doing research," Tommy said. "About the North Cascades. About Sasquatch." I raised an eyebrow. "Tommy." "Just listen," he interrupted. "I know how it sounds. But there's been a pattern of sightings in that region for decades. Hundreds of reports. Most get dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but some of them are from credible witnesses. Park rangers, biologists, experienced outdoorsmen. And you know what's interesting? The highest concentration of sightings is in an area that roughly corresponds to that restricted federal land. So you think the government has known about them? I think the government has been protecting them. Or protecting their habitat. Or maybe protecting us from them. I don't know. But that equipment we were hauling? If it was meant to map underground caves and caverns, and if those caves are in Sasquatch territory, then we were hauling equipment that could have exposed their hiding places, I finished. Equipment that could have revealed where they live, where they're vulnerable. Tommy nodded. And that creature on the bridge knew it. Somehow, it knew what we were carrying, and it stopped us. Delayed us. Delayed us for what? I don't know. But 47 minutes is a long time, Marcus. Long enough for something to happen. Long enough for someone, or something, to act. I pulled out my phone and called Helen again. When she answered, I asked her a question I'd been afraid to voice. Helen, did that cargo ever make it to Cascade Resources Group? There was a pause on the other end. That's the weird thing, Marcus. It didn't. When the train reached Spokane, those 6 flat cars were uncoupled and held at the rail yard. They sat there for 2 days under armed guard, and then they were shipped back to Lewis McCord. The entire delivery was canceled. Why? No explanation. The contract was just terminated. And the restricted area in the North Cascades? There was a geological event there, a small earthquake, 3.2 magnitude, the same night you made your emergency stop. Happened about 45 minutes after you stopped the train. My blood ran cold. Earthquake. Yeah. Centered right in that restricted zone. Caused a partial cave-in, apparently. Sealed off some underground passages. By the time the survey team would have arrived with that equipment, there was nothing left to survey. The caves they wanted to map were collapsed. After I hung up, Tommy and I sat in silence for several minutes. That wasn't an earthquake, Tommy finally said. Was it? I thought about the creature standing on that bridge. Thought about the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate way it had blocked our path. Thought about 47 minutes. Just enough time to reach those caves, to collapse them, to protect whatever was hidden inside. No, I said quietly. I don't think it was. So what do we do? I folded up the map and finished my coffee. We keep our mouths shut. We take our suspension, go through the motions of the investigation, and we don't tell anyone what we really saw out there. Marcus. They're protecting themselves, Tommy. That creature and whoever else is out there. They collapsed their own home to keep it secret, to keep themselves safe. The least we can do is respect that. Tommy looked troubled but nodded slowly. And if the investigation doesn't clear us? If we lose our jobs over this? I thought about it. Thought about 23 years of service, of pensions and retirement plans, and the life I'd built on the rails. Then I thought about those eyes meeting mine across the distance. About that single nod of acknowledgement. Then we lose our jobs, I said. Some things are more important than a career. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of phone calls, depositions, meetings with Northern Pacific corporate lawyers, and endless repetition of the same story. Tommy and I stuck to our narrative. We saw a large animal on the tracks. We made a split-second decision to avoid a collision. We followed our safety training. The military's position was that we'd overreacted, that we should have used air horn warnings and reduced speed rather than emergency braking. They wanted us fired as an example, a deterrent against future, unauthorized stops of classified cargo. But Northern Pacific's legal team pushed back. They argued that conductor discretion in emergency situations was a fundamental safety principle, that firing us would set a dangerous precedent that could compromise safety across the entire rail network. In the end, it was a compromise. Tommy and I were officially reprimanded for excessive caution and downgraded from priority freight routes to regional cargo runs. It wasn't a firing, but it was a clear message. We'd been demoted, sidelined, our careers effectively stalled. I should have been angry. I should have fought it. But honestly, I was relieved. Because during those 3 weeks, I'd started having dreams. Not nightmares, exactly. More like Visitations. I'd be standing on that bridge again, in the darkness, and the creature would be there. But this time, it wouldn't jump. It would walk toward me, slowly, deliberately, until it stood close enough that I could see every detail. The deep-set eyes, intelligent and ancient. The weathered face that was somehow both human and not. The hands, yes, hands, with opposable thumbs and fingernails, not claws. And in the dream, it would speak. Not with words, but with images and emotions that flooded directly into my mind. I saw forests older than human civilization. I saw underground caverns lit by bioluminescent fungi, vast networks of tunnels that stretched beneath the mountains. I saw families, groups of these creatures living in small clans, raising their young, caring for their elderly. I saw them watching us. Watching humanity spread across the land like a slow-motion flood, consuming forests, damming rivers, building roads and cities and mines. I felt their grief as their territory shrank year by year, decade by decade. I felt their fear as our technology grew more sophisticated, more invasive, more capable of finding what they'd spent millennia keeping hidden. And I understood why that creature had stood on the bridge. It wasn't just about protecting their caves. It was about survival. About buying time. About making one last desperate stand against the inevitable encroachment of our world into theirs. When I woke from these dreams, I'd find myself crying. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd witnessed. The profound loneliness of being a species on the edge of extinction, hiding in the shrinking pockets of wilderness, knowing that discovery meant death. I never told Tommy about the dreams. How could I? It sounded crazy even to me. But 6 weeks after the incident, something happened that made me realize I wasn't the only one being haunted. I received a package at my apartment. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in rural Montana. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on plain paper. You saw one of us. You stopped when you could have killed. For this, you deserve to know the truth. Watch this alone. Tell no one. Destroy it when you're done. A friend of the forest. My hands shook as I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The video that played was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was shot in what appeared to be a forest clearing, filmed from a concealed position. The footage was high quality, professional grade, and it showed a group of 6 creatures. Sasquatch. A family unit, clearly. 2 adults, one significantly larger than the other, probably male and female, and 4 juveniles of varying sizes. They were engaged in what could only be described as daily life. The young ones were playing, chasing each other around the clearing while the adults watched. One of the juveniles picked up a stick and began drawing patterns in the dirt, geometric shapes, surprisingly complex. The larger adult made a sound, not a growl or roar, but something more nuanced. Almost like language. The juveniles immediately stopped playing and gathered around. What followed was clearly a teaching moment. The adult was showing them something, demonstrating some technique with their hands. Tool use. Problem solving. Intelligence. Unmistakable, undeniable intelligence. The video ran for 12 minutes. In that time, I watched these beings display behavior that was complex, social, cultural. This wasn't just an unknown primate species. This was another human-like intelligence sharing the planet with us. And we'd been hunting them, denying their existence, treating them as myths and monsters. When the video ended, a text document auto-opened on my screen. There are fewer than 2,000 of us left in North America. We live in the places you've forgotten, the wilderness you haven't yet consumed. We've watched your species grow from small tribes to a global civilization. We've seen you develop tools, language, art, all the things that make you human. We developed these things too, thousands of years before you did. But we chose a different path. We chose to live in balance with the forest rather than conquer it. For centuries, this worked. We stayed hidden. You stayed in your cities and farms. But now, there's nowhere left to hide. Your satellites can see through the trees. Your sensors can detect body heat from miles away. Your survey equipment can map the caves where we shelter our children. The train you stopped was carrying equipment that would have exposed our last major sanctuary. We couldn't let that happen. We collapsed the caves ourselves. Better to lose our home than to be discovered. You made a choice that night. You chose compassion over duty. You sacrificed your career to protect something you didn't understand. For this, we thank you. And we wanted you to know, you were right. We are real. We are intelligent. We are dying. If humanity ever reaches a point where it can accept our existence without destroying us, we'll reveal ourselves. Until then, we remain in the shadows. Thank you for keeping our secret. This message will self-delete in 60 seconds. I sat frozen, reading and rereading the text as the countdown began. 40 seconds. 30. 20. At 10 seconds, I made a decision. I grabbed my phone and photographed the screen, capturing the message. Then I watched as the document deleted itself, followed by the video file, followed by all data on the USB drive. When it was done, the drive was completely blank. Erased. I sat in my apartment for hours after that, staring at the photograph on my phone, trying to process what I'd just learned. They were real. They were intelligent. They were dying. And I was one of maybe a handful of humans who knew the truth. The next day, I called Tommy and asked him to meet me at the same coffee shop. When he arrived, I could see the weight on him too, the sleepless nights, the questions that wouldn't stop circling. I need to show you something, I said, and I showed him the photograph of the message. He read it in silence, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock to something like grief. Jesus, he whispered. Marcus, this is the most important discovery in human history. I know. We have to tell someone. Scientists, anthropologists, conservationists, people who could help protect them. Tell them what? I asked. We have a photograph of text that could easily be faked. We have a story about a creature on a bridge that we officially reported as possibly a bear. We have no physical evidence, no DNA, no video of our own. Who would believe us? But they're dying out there. If we don't do something. They asked us not to, I interrupted. They specifically asked us to keep their secret. They've been hiding from us for thousands of years, Tommy. They know something we don't. They know that revealing themselves would be the end of them. Can you imagine what would happen if the world found out Sasquatch was real? The media circus? The hunters and thrill-seekers flooding the forests? The governments claiming jurisdiction? The corporations fighting over the rights to their habitat? Tommy slumped in his chair. So we just do nothing? We honor their choice, I said. We keep their secret. And we hope that someday, humanity evolves enough to deserve their trust. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Okay. But Marcus, if that day comes, if there's ever a chance to help them, we speak up. Agreed. Agreed. That was 5 years ago. Tommy and I finished out our railroad careers on regional routes, retired with our diminished pensions, and tried to return to normal life. We stayed in touch, meeting occasionally to share a beer and wonder if we'd made the right choice. The restricted area in the North Cascades remains restricted. The survey project was never revived. Cascade Resources Group lost its government contract and quietly went out of business 6 months later. I still have the photograph of that message on my phone, encrypted and hidden in a folder I never open. I've never shown it to anyone except Tommy. It's my proof, my evidence that I wasn't crazy, that what I saw was real. But more than that, it's my reminder. A reminder that we share this planet with intelligences we don't understand. That not every mystery needs to be solved, not every unknown needs to be conquered. That sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is leave something alone. I think about that creature on the bridge sometimes. About the choice it made to stand in front of 8,000 tons of steel, trusting that the human at the controls would choose mercy over momentum. About the 47 minutes it bought for its people, and the home they destroyed to protect their children. I think about the fact that I lost my career, or at least the trajectory of it, because I chose to stop rather than kill something I didn't understand. And I realize I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Last month, I went hiking in the North Cascades. Not in the restricted area. I'm not stupid, but in the nearby wilderness. I camped alone for 3 days, hiking trails that barely saw a dozen visitors a year. On the second night, I woke around 3 a.m. to a sound outside my tent. Not threatening, just present. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling my campsite at a distance. I lay in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, listening. The footsteps stopped about 30 yards from my tent. There was a long silence. Then, I heard a sound I'd heard only once before, that nuanced, almost language vocalization. But this time, it was softer. Gentler. It sounded like a farewell. Then the footsteps retreated, fading into the forest until there was only the wind and the distant call of an owl. In the morning, I found tracks. Just one set, but they were clear in the soft earth near my tent. 16 inches long, 5 toes, distinctly humanoid but much larger than any human foot. They led to my campsite, circled it once, and then headed deeper into the wilderness, into terrain too rough for me to follow. I took a photograph of the best print. Not to show anyone. I learned my lesson about that. But to remind myself. They're still out there. Still watching. Still hoping that someday, we'll be ready to share the world with them rather than take it from them. I don't know if that day will ever come. Human nature being what it is, I'm not optimistic. We're not very good at coexisting with things we don't understand. We're not very good at leaving mysteries unsolved. But I stopped that train. I sacrificed my career for a creature I glimpsed for less than a minute. And in doing so, I became part of their story. Part of their survival. Maybe there are others like me out there. Other conductors, other drivers, other people who've glimpsed something impossible and made the choice to protect it rather than exploit it. Maybe there are enough of us, scattered across the wilderness, keeping the secret, buying them time. Or maybe I'm alone in this. Maybe Tommy and I are the only ones who know, the only ones who carry this weight. Either way, I keep their secret. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Because that night on the Cascade Trestle, a creature looked me in the eyes and trusted me with the survival of its species. And I'll be damned if I betray that trust. They told me I was crazy. That I threw away my career for nothing. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that sometimes the most important thing you can do is hit the brakes. Even when everyone tells you to keep going. Even when it costs you everything. Especially then.